Hello, class. My name is Makita Connor, and I completed my senior thesis on barriers to reintegration after incarceration. I will begin with a quote from Michelle Alexander. Alexander is a former civil rights lawyer turned scholar. Quote, "We have not ended racial caste in America, we have merely redesigned it," end quote. So when Michelle Alexander discusses a racial caste system in America, what she's referring to is a time when before civil rights legislation, there were Jim Crow laws that promoted segregation and stripped blacks of voting rights during the past 2 centuries. So the civil rights laws, when they came into effect in the 1960s, they, changed this legislation. However, racial caste in America has reappeared again, and the problem is it never really went away. It was just redesigned. So now we promote racial caste through our criminal justice system. So people of color are disproportionately incarcerated, and this is a way to keep people confined and not promote them moving up the social ladder. My topic is important because close to 95% of individuals incarcerated in state prisons are eventually released. So what this means is that only a small percentage of people spend the remainder of their lives in jail or prison. Therefore, we have to plan accordingly because one day these individuals have to transition back into society. And how easy or how tough their transition is really depends on the help they receive from the community, from those that are, in charge of monitoring them if they're released on conditions of community supervision, families, friends. Everyone plays a vital role. So in order to see change, we have to be a part of that change we want. We can't exclude these individuals and treat them as if they're monsters. Everyone is deserving of second chances. So therefore, it would be smart to, implement programs that are actually helping these individuals while they're on the inside. So when they come home, these skills and vocational training and education that they receive in prison will help them find employment, get in school, do something productive so they can be positive and contribute positive things to their community. Also, policy changes correlate with incarceration as opposed to an increase in criminal behavior. So what this means is it's wrong to assume, or a lot of us have the tendency to assume like, wow, so many people are incarcerated, it must be an increase in crime. However, to the contrary, that's the furthest thing from the truth. Crime appears to be, remain relatively stable. However, the policy changes we have send many people back to jail or prison for minor parole violations. Also, low-level drug offenders, which are poor people of color, their behavior is treated as criminal primarily because they belong to a class that's lower in the socioeconomic status. So these people receive disproportionate sentences is not proportionate to the crimes they're committing. So someone may commit like a drug crime where they have a few bags of weed or something and they're receiving a sentence of 1 year, or and this increases in this big burst of people that's in the criminal justice system. Like it's just overflowing with people. So ex-offenders, as I've stated, face barriers when trying to reintegrate back into society. And this all goes back to one, from the time, they enter the system until the time they get out. Every step in the criminal justice process is very crucial, from the time a judge sentences them, from the time they're incarcerated, until the time they're about to be released. Everything that happens within that time frame is important. So they need the most amount of help possible. So now a little bit of review on the literature. As I touched on in the previous slide, ex-offenders experience substantial barriers even when it comes to employment. So many don't have support from family and friends, and some have nowhere to go. They don't know where they'll live. That's one of the first things they're worried about. Then next, employment is seen as a positive way, like it correlates with some people recidivism less, or longer times in between reincarceration if someone has steady employment. So for this reason, you would think that most people would want someone who comes home to have a job opposed to them committing further crime. However, this does not always happen. And so ex-offenders face discrimination in the job and housing markets due to their criminal backgrounds. And there are policies that allow the exclusion of this group of people. And so besides individuals, with psychiatric or intellectual disabilities, someone with a criminal history has been rated less likely to get a job and keep one opposed to others. So like it's like just crazy to think that, these people are like just considered as like, subhuman, like, oh, they're not qualified or they don't need jobs, or, just further punishing them. So it's like these collateral consequences, like they already have served their time, then they come home and it's like they're serving a second sentence. They have no help. So moving on to the public housing agencies have adopted exclusionary policies as well in the United States. So the housing sector is dominated by private business, which controls well over 90% of all housing. So public housing authorities have the right to deny public housing to ex-offenders with drug convictions, and they have the right to evict families if a household member has a criminal record, or if there's speculation by a public agent that a household member is a drug user. So a lot of this goes back to the war on drugs. So during this time when it was all this like trying to combat crime and the drug war, President Reagan, followed by the Bush administration, they were really strict on these people who were receiving public housing. And so, like I said, there are so many policies in place that makes it perfectly fine to discriminate against people who are ex-offenders for at least for a certain amount of time. And also, 2/3 of U.S. parolees are rearrested within 3 years of release. And this also contributes to the fact, right, they have no assistance. Some have nowhere to live, no employment, so no way to, maintain a stable income. So it's like, if they have nothing that's keeping them, like motivating them to stay out of trouble, most of them will recidivate and go back to their old ways. So two research questions that I thought was important was, did prison programs prepare inmates or offenders for reentry into society, and what changes are necessary in the legal system? So for these questions, I directly asked individuals that I interviewed because I think it's very important to know what works and what does not work. And it's also important to see like how people view our criminal justice system and the policies that are in place, and if possible what recommendations they can make to make the system better. So the methods, I conducted qualitative semi-structured interviews. I interviewed a total of 3 individuals, 2 women, 1 man. I sat face to face with interviewees. I coded my data by grouping common themes together. So whenever a theme reappeared throughout each interview, I took a highlighter and I highlighted different colors, and then I matched them by categories and was like, oh, okay, I seen this amount of times. I seen that amount of times. So these things stood out to me, and I felt it was important, to incorporate those themes and um, find, like, dig deeper and do further research on those things to see what information was out there that supported these themes that kept reappearing throughout the interviews. So I really enjoyed it. So it was very good to be hands on, like questions that I structured myself, although they were open ended, and it allowed for conversation to take place between me and individuals. So for this section, I will share one quote from Michelle Alexander and one quote from an interviewee. So the first quote by Michelle Alexander is, the one social group in America we have permission to hate is criminals. So basically, in a nutshell, she's saying that, once someone commits any offense, it's okay to exclude them. It's okay to discriminate against them. It's okay to cast them out of society because, the criminal justice system operates on this notion that people choose to freely do things, like this free will. So you rationally consider to make the right choice or make the wrong choice, and therefore no one should feel sorry for you. So the quote that comes from the interviewee is, quote, "They could be more caring and the judge could be a little more easier on people with these little bitty ass cases. Some officers will just take you to jail and make you sit there for 3 weeks for drinking. A judge will give you 3 years for a joint and 6 years for a pipe," referring to a crack pipe. So it's very sad that, individuals are disproportionately sentenced, as we have already covered, and it does seem as if there needs to be some reform, and it has to start higher up. And to conclude, my first policy implication would be more mentoring reentry programs. This would be helpful, and I think, if individuals have someone they can trust and talk to on a one-on-one basis, it helps, build positive relationships and positive networks. Secondly, I think we need to utilize reentry programs that incorporate surveillance as well as treatment. So, just surveillance alone will not be effective. So, we need to focus on programs that target specific offender needs. And once we know those needs, we sit there and we, come up with a framework of how we can implement these policies, and this can likely help the individual and prevent them from reoffending. And in conclusion, further punishment and exclusion after incarceration is not right. We need to not look at these individuals that have some made mistakes as subhuman and not deserving of a second chance. And that will be all. And thank you. And I really enjoyed this semester.